I mean, as you say, Simon, the two biggest airports, Heathrow and Gatwick, were clearly always going to be really terribly affected. But airports up and down the country were going to be having problems yesterday, weren't they?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we saw the most cancellations at Heathrow and Gatwick, closely followed by Manchester Airport, also Luton, Edinburgh, badly affected. And the airlines are going to be furious at the losses, which I calculate on the back of a boarding pass to be about £80 million. And that's in terms of lost revenue, in terms of the duty of care that they have. So there's going to be some interesting conversations between the airlines and NATS, the air traffic provider.
How well did the airlines handle this? Because, of course, when things go wrong, it's not immediately the Civil Aviation Authority they turn to, or even National Air Traffic Service. It's the airlines themselves.
Well, the airlines have an absolute strict and well-known obligation to look after you. Your flight is cancelled. They have to find you accommodation. They have to find you a place on the next available flight, even if it means paying hundreds of pounds to arrival. They have to provide you with your meals. Having said all of that, there will be an awful lot of people listening and watching you say, well, hang on, we didn't get any of that. We've had politicians, we've had the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary saying, oh, these are your rights, and the airline has to do this for you. And the airlines just don't have the systems in place. They don't have the people at the airports. They don't have the arrangements for people who are perhaps frail. They can't book things online. They haven't got a credit card to pay for hotels. And there really needs to be a complete reassessment of how well the airlines look after their passengers when things, as they say in the industry, go tango uniform.
Indeed. Michele, to bring you in at this point, look, first and foremost, tell us about your troubles yesterday. You were over in, I think it was Jersey.
Yes, so I was just there for one night and I was due to fly back at lunchtime yesterday, at exactly the time where it all started to go horribly wrong. So initially, I actually knew, a bit like Simon, fairly early on that something had gone wrong. In fact, I believe that the system failed earlier in the morning, but because they have backups in place, nobody actually realised for quite a few hours. And then as they were looking to go manual, obviously that's when the delays started. Initially, we were told that it was indefinitely delayed, although the app was showing about 8 p.m, so quite a substantial delay. Then suddenly they rushed us out to the plane to get on. In between that, we also had an evacuation of the terminal just to add to the fun for the day. And then and it was one of those days where I thought, is someone playing a joke? And then we all got on the plane in the hope that because the plane was there and we were ready to go, that they would perhaps bring a slot forward. But unfortunately, we were there for about 4 hours in total. And then we eventually got a slot. But at that point, the toilets weren't working. So everybody quickly rushed off to back to the terminal briefly because they couldn't fix it in time for the slot, and then got back on and off we went about, I think just after 4 or so. We were around about 4.5 hours late. So I count myself as incredibly fortunate compared with all those other people. I had 2 friends that were there at the same time as me, booked a couple of hours after me, and they basically got told they would be there till at least Thursday. So they've had to get a ferry back.
I will confess, my knowledge of what exactly has happened to you is pretty minimal. Let me just read you that which seems to be the line that has been put out by NATS, the National Air Traffic Service. Technical failure meant air traffic controllers could no longer automatically process flight plans. Look, Michele, given that my knowledge of air traffic control is limited to watching the movie Airplane, explain exactly what that sentence means.
So what it means is there's a flight planning system that both the Scottish Centre in Prestwick and the London Centre, which is down in Swanwick near Southampton, use to get all the information on flights. So controllers have a radar in front of them, and they need to know which plane is which. They need to know what the flight number is, what the aircraft type is, so they can separate them properly, and they need to know where they're going and what route they're taking. So they need all that information in front of them on the screen, and they also have electronic strips. So to get that information, normally it's all transferred electronically. Most of the airlines have bulk plans because obviously they fly the same plans all summer, and that will just automatically go into the system. Now, unfortunately, what happens is there was a complete failure of this flight planning system, and they do have a backup, as I mentioned, which runs for about 4 hours worth of data. once it gets to the end of those 4 hours, they need to switch to a manual system, and they will normally make the decision quite a time in advance, at which point they start putting on these zero rates you may have heard of, which basically means that anything in the sky carries on, because obviously can't really stop that. You don't want to divert things, but anything already on the ground, like we were, will just sit there. And then they will go into a manual state. The controllers see a similar display to what they would have been seeing before, but a lot of things have to be done manually, such as coordinating with other centres and controllers. There'd be more phone calls, and then the people behind the scenes will be working extremely hard, putting every single flight plan in individually. So you can imagine how long that takes.
Everyone can imagine what the screen looks like in front of the controllers themselves. But absent that information, so you've just got dots on a screen and you don't know who they are. Is it that simple?
Yeah, if we didn't have manual flight plans put in, you would not know all the details on the flight. So controllers couldn't control safely. So there's no other option but to get someone to do that manually.
When we're putting this information in manually, I mean, literally, again, is that someone sitting at a PC with a keyboard inputting data that has been, faxed over to them, sent over by electronic mail, something like that?
Yeah, so it's literally the air traffic control assistants and the flight planning department will be sitting there entering all the different fields into the flight planning system. So it is that simple. And these will all be coming in from the adjacent centres in the airlines. Obviously, it gets particularly worse because at that point they're all refiling because everything's delayed and cancelled. So it makes it even more complicated because it's obviously a constantly changing picture.
What then of the reports doing the rounds at the moment that a badly filed flight plan from a French airline somehow brought the entire system to its knees? I mean, first, explain whether or not that is possible, and second, what that means.
So when there have been failures in the past, it's normally something to do with a bad information that's been input in the incorrect format. It's a very old system. It's been running for many years. And generally, we've been very lucky. We don't often have failures, or if we do, we get it back during that backup time, which is what it's there for. But there have been other instances in the past where something's been incorrectly formatted and the flight plan computer behaves in a way they're not expecting, and it effectively causes it to be to fail. So it is a potential possibility. What they're saying could be true. That could be enough to potentially crash the system, in effect, if it was formatted incorrectly.
Again, just to try and keep this as simple as possible, I mean, we use an awful lot of technology here at Sky, and sometimes if you put special characters into the box where you're supposed to be putting text, it can make lots of funny things appear on screen. Thankfully, it doesn't really happen very often, but is that what you're talking about? Something as simple as that could have brought the whole system down.
So, for example, you have to space things in a certain way using a certain number of dots, as an example, and things like that. If people don't do it, and they do it in a very unique way that's never been done before, obviously, because otherwise it would happen every day. So it has to be something, pretty unusual that they've input for it to happen. But it's as I said, an old system that perhaps something was input yesterday that it's never seen before, and that's what caused it to obviously have this reaction where it's failed.
I mean, Simon, this feels like an appropriate point to bring you back in. I mean, can you believe this?
No, my jaw is dropping more and more and more the more we're hearing about this. You cannot just allow somebody to put in some completely random information and say, oh, don't like that, and now we're going to shut the whole system down. It's most definitely, I think we're much more likely to be talking about foul up rather than foul play in this. But it sounds as though you wouldn't even actually have to be a particularly good hacker to bring the whole thing to its knees if a badly written flight plan is able to do it for you.
Yeah, and I suppose, and obviously we should point out, again, Michele is here to give us the benefit of her more than 2 decades of experience, certainly not to act as an advocate or in defence of the National Air Traffic Services. But Simon, given that which we've just heard, I mean, you said at the very outset, there are going to be an awful lot of questions for NATS. I mean, I suggest that if the system is as capable of falling over or from one single input, then there will be significant questions asked about backups, safeties, and whether or not there needs to be a move to another system at some point where this doesn't happen.
Well, I think it's fair to say that safety was never, ever an issue on this. And the UK, quite rightly, has an extremely good reputation for good air traffic control. But yes, I mean, this is sounding like one of those legacy IT systems where it's basically sellotape and string have been applied rather than the kind of 21st century systems that you would expect. I'm not an IT expert. I'm certainly not an air traffic control expert, but if it is the case that, and from what we were hearing, it's a regular occurrence, somebody feeds in some nonsense and the system doesn't automatically just spit it out and say, have another go, pal. That's really, really concerning. And the 4 hours that it took to fix this problem, that is really worrying as well, because, of course, every single minute compounds the chaos at Britain's airports.